Good afternoon and welcome to another Target Solutions training video. I'm Andy Smith, Gold Ranch Fire District Communications Officer. Today we're going to go over the function and use of the dual band radio. These are long anticipated radios, and we'll finally be deploying them into the field. And the video today will be going over the functions and use of the new dual band radio and also the dual band fleet map guide. These are primarily the objectives in today's video. The radios will be replacing both the XTS 5000 single band VHF radio and also the single band PC Win radio. So, without further ado, let's jump right in and get started. Okay, so as indicated, the radios we'll be replacing will be the handhelds predominantly, which is the APX 6000 single band and the XTS 5000 single band VHF. However, we'll still be maintaining single band radios predominantly inside fire apparatus, fire engines, which will be the VHF radios. We have two primary VHF radios we use at Gold Ranch Fire District, the Motorola XTL 5000 and the Kenwood 7180. These are single band VHF radios. And we also use in command staff vehicles single band PC Win radios for the PC Win radio network. I just wanted to go over just a few basic functions and a refresher on the radios, and that is the direct button is depressed and DIR will appear in the radio if it's a repeated channel. That means you can go car to car or simplex with any units in the vicinity. It's a great option to have if you're either on F2 or F3, which are repeaters, and you're out of range of the repeater. You can hit direct and call the unit in front of you and have communication with them in a direct mode instead of trying to go through the repeater. And the other one is monitor, monitor on, monitor off on the Motorola radios, and that essentially drops a PL tone. I'll be going to the stations and doing more detailed classes on this, and so I'm not going to get wrapped around the axle on this video. But just know these two buttons, direct and monitor, are available options on the radio. On the Kenwood, the direct is the orange arrow, and it's also indicated by a small little radio that appears on the screen by depressing the button. And the monitor button will be the black square indicated by a speaker that appears in the display. Again, it can be depressed and just in similar manner of the Motorola radio. I have these little red dots here. These indicate that the radios have been programmed to the new dual band fleet map, which I'll get to in a moment. If you have a radio inside of a vehicle that has a red dot, that tells you that the radio has been reprogrammed, and it also tells me that I have touched the radio and programmed it to the new dual band program. On the single band PC Win radio, they're very simple. Nothing has changed on them, and I have quick recalls on the second button, or MS2, and MS3 for F2 and F3. And I'm going to go into how this radio can now talk to these radios over the new network. The dual band handheld is very similar in function to the single band handhelds that we have been using for the last couple of years on the PC Win, with the only exception of a few more buttons and the fact that it's also dual band. So I'm going to start right from the top on the features and functions of the radio. Volume control on and off. Unlike the old PC Win radios, when the radio was turned off with the knob, you had to depress the button on the bottom or the two dot button and hold it for several seconds before the radio would completely shut off. Now with these radios, that's not the case. You can simply turn the radio off and with the knob, and it'll be off. Channel selector, of course, channel 1 through 16, as before. And on the slider switch up here, that's indicated by a a little zero or a little circle, then a circle with a cross through it. One is keypad lock, and then keypad unlock. And then, of course, the orange button is the emergency button, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. On the side of the radio, we have backlight function. So you can depress it, and it essentially turns the backlight of the screen off. If it's depressed for several seconds, it'll revert, or invert, I should say, the display. So if you have it on your belt and you would prefer to read the display when it's on your belt, you can press and hold, and it reverts the display. Of course, push to talk, and the top button, or the 1 button,
F7, fire 7.
is essentially a recall button. So you can press it to get a quick indication of what channel you're on.
F7, fire 7.
In this case, this radio is on F7. The bottom button, or the 2 dots, is for monitor. And that's to open squelch, and it can maintain squelch if it's depressed for several seconds. This is advantageous for analog channels only in an area where you're having some difficulty reading a radio signal. Opening squelch will greatly help in receiving a signal. The front screen is very similar to the single band PC Win radios that we're currently using, in that the first dot is the zone, and you can toggle through the zones. As you see here, we now have a total of 13 zones altogether. And we also have the home button, which will get you back to home. So if you're in here toggling through channels and you wish to exit out, simply go back home and it'll take you right back. I've also programmed all the radios with a quick feature recall. So all you have to do is momentarily press the 1
F1,
to take you to F1,
B2 dispatch,
F2, F3,
B3 EMS1.
and so on. I did channels 1 through 8, so it makes it real easy for you to maneuver around the various frequencies that we will commonly use 99% of the time. Here is a handheld radio with a belt clip and also an extension microphone on it. And I just want to briefly go over the features of the extension speaker and microphone. This side toggle switch here is a volume control. As I hold it, or as I momentarily press it, it will continually raise the volume up, and then inverse will slowly pull the volume down. There's a test tone there to indicate how loud it is, which is pretty cool. It also has a very bright LED flashlight on there by depressing this small black button. Depress it again, it'll turn off. Of course, push to talk, and then right here is again another 1 dot button, which is similar to the 1 dot on the side of the radio, which does the exact same function. By depressing it,
B2 dispatch.
it'll tell you what frequency you're on. So this is very handy if the radio is in a coat pocket, you have it attached to an SCBA, and you have your hand mic up here, up on your shoulder, and you're not exactly sure what frequency you may be on. This is a handy way of quickly identifying what channel you're on
B2 dispatch.
by simply depressing that button. On the emergency buttons, both the hand mic and the radio have the orange emergency buttons. The emergency buttons only work on digital trunk radio channels such as PC Win, and I'll be going over the frequencies here shortly. These do not work in an analog environment or on our fireground frequencies. If we're fighting a fire on F4, F6, F7, this functionality does not work. However, if it is depressed and you are on a PC Win channel, such as B2 or B3, and I'll be explaining those in a moment, it'll invert you to a emergency channel over to the dispatch center. It'll be alerted, and they will then be advised of what unit has depressed the emergency button. If you do accidentally hit the emergency button, as on the other PC Win radios, you simply press and hold it for a total of approximately 3 to 4 seconds, and it'll invert back to a normal state. Again, you have to hold and depress this for approximately 3 seconds to activate it, so hopefully there won't be too many emergency activations. The belt clips are pretty cool. They're designed by a firefighter at Tucson Fire Department. And you can put on a carabiner, or you can also carabine onto the D-ring on the actual hand mic as well. It rotates. It has a belt clip on it as well, so it's pretty cool, very functional, and it's going to be a great addition to some of the radios we have. As we're almost familiar with in the past, we maintained a radio channel roster, or a fleet map, which typically resided on the back side of most sun visors of vehicles when we had a 48 channel radio, A, B, and C, 16 channels each. Now that the new dual band radios contain a total of 13 zones or decks, obviously this sheet will really no longer apply, nor will it completely fit behind a sun visor. So it will now be replaced by the dual band radio fleet map guide. And this is a book that I made up and is laminated that will have essentially the exact same things that we had on the single band fleet map guide with the 3 banks, except this one will have all 13. And also I have a little bit better explanation and more information on channel usage. So if you start with the cover, the dual band radio fleet map guide is the legend. The page color, if it's yellow, that indicates it's a VHF channel. If it's green, it's PC Win or 700 or 800 megahertz radio system. So as you go through the various pages, a green page would be a PC Win or 800 megahertz, and a yellow would be a VHF channel group. The mode color. Mode, blue will be simplex or S, red is analog for repeater, and green would be trunked repeater or a TR group. And again, that will be indicated off to the side here. In the mode, S, blue, would be a simplex, R would be a conventional repeater in VHF. And then on an 800 megahertz or trunked system would be trunked radio. So that would be your mode. On the very back of the book is the index, which goes through all 13 zones, A through M, and it'll describe what each of those zones has in it. It's just a quick reference and a table of contents, if you will, index to guide you through the book. On the second page within the cover is the available interoperable solutions page. This page is going to probably come in pretty handy during the events that we run into another agency, whether it be law enforcement or fire, and have the ability to communicate with them. So for instance, Department of Public Safety in the Tucson area is still utilizing UHF. Home system is UHF. The first selection would be K2 or K3 airs channels, and I'll go through the fleet map in a moment. And we do not have a direct or simplex channel available with them. So the second zone would simply indicate if we have direct simplex channels available to talk to the agencies. The first zone here, or group of channels, are ones that would be on repeaters or on a digital trunk network. Corona Tucson, to interact with them, we can talk with them on C1 through 16, E1, or K2 airs. We also have the ability to talk to them direct on H6, 7, or 8 air direct in the F zone. And as you go through the book, you'll see what I'm describing, but I just wanted to indicate that this page will come in very handy when you have questions about interoperating with other agencies who may be on the system or outside the system. Now that we went over the indexes and some of the features of the dual band fleet map guide, now I'm just going to go briefly through the various zones that are programmed into the radio and describe them. Again, I'll be coming around to the stations. We'll be having further, more detailed classes, if you will, on the uses of these frequencies. So again, we'll just briefly go through these and describe them, and also indicate any changes that may have taken place. We first start off with the A zone. A is basically remained intact, with the exception of VMed 28, which is a medical simplex channel that can get you into meds control on a VHF simplex channel. Again, that can be indicated by the blue S, which tells you it's a simplex. And also with the addition of A14 and A15, which are digital trunk groups, and they are not VHF. F5, or mutual aid, still remains the same. That's still your best channel to contact air-to-ground aeromedical helicopters. And F course 6 remains fireground predominantly for the south of the Golden Ranch Fire District, and anything north of Oracle Junction, A7 should still be selected, for instance, up there for a tactical channel. F2 and F3, as you read this page, it says in service F2 simulcast, and A3 is medical F3 simulcast. I'll explain the simulcast in a moment when we go to the B card. But basically, what you hear on A2 and A3 will also be heard on B2 and B3. We go to the B deck, and you can see there's 3 VHF channels in there, indicated by the yellow, and then the remainder of them are trunk radio or PC Win channels. And here again, we see B2 and B3, dispatch in service F2 simulcast, medical F3 simulcast. Again, what you hear on these, you'll hear over on the A deck. We also included a couple more EMS talk groups that can be used on the digital trunk network, EMS2 and EMS3. We put meds calling on channel 6. 7 is Oro Valley Hospital. Every fire department will most likely program their radios differently. Obviously, Northwest Fire District, for instance, will have Northwest Hospital in their B7, and then we all elected to put UMC in B8. We go on down through a couple more TFD channels, and we have another tactical yellow, which again indicates VHF simplex channel that can be used for training if we wish. And then we have a couple more administrative channels that we have for talk around if we want. We still haven't quite decided exactly how we're going to be using these channels yet, but there'll be more information to follow on what we're going to do with them. And then we also have a training channel that TFD allowed us to share. We move now to the C zone. C zone has not changed from the old single band radios. They are still referred to as the interoperable channels, or the commons. 1 through 8 are fire department specific. So in other words, fire agencies C1 through C8 are fire department interop. If it's a police department, it would be police or law enforcement interop 1 through 8. So in our case, it's fire department. Once you go past C9 and all the way up to C16, those are common for both law and fire. So both law enforcement and fire have the exact same radio program in their C zone, 9 through 16. C1 is typically referred to as the fire calling channel. That would be a channel that you would initially maybe strike conversation on in an interoperable situation, and then you'd move off to a different talk group to conduct the remainder of the communication. 6, or interop 6, is interagency training channel. This would be the channel that would be predominantly used down at the PSA or interacting with other departments who are on PC Win and in a training mode. And then the last one would be C16. We'd call that the cross-discipline calling channel. So in this case, that would be where police would hail a fire agency, for instance. This isn't really set in stone. These are just kind of handshake agreements on how we decided we would be using these common channels. We go to the D zone. The D zone has not changed as from the PC Win radios. It's still the Tucson area medical. And as you can see, those channels have not changed. The exception now is when we printed this book, D12, it says Hospital Extra. It is now the medical center that is located in the Vail area. Again, that has since changed, and when we have a new revision of this book, I'll be putting that in there. We also put a couple what they call tactical channels in D15 and 16. Those would be talk channels in the event of a major medical incident in most cases. We are now to the E zone, or 800 megahertz airs. AIRS standing for Arizona Interoperable Radio System. These are the 800 megahertz suites of the AIRS. As you can see by the mode, they're analog repeaters. They're conventional repeaters that are on a tri-band. So in other words, communications that take place on the AIRS 800 also would be rebroadcasted on VHF and UHF. We go to the F zone, which is another set of mutual aid frequencies that are NIFOG. And I'll briefly explain the NIFOG in a moment. But these are interoperable channels used nationwide that reside on the 800 megahertz band. We go to the G zone, and these are 700 megahertz NIFOG frequencies. Again, these are nationwide frequencies that reside in the 700 megahertz band, and they're a series of repeaters or simplex. The repeaters aren't always deployed, and they would only be activated during certain events. In most cases, repeaters will not be active, but the simplex channels can be used if an agency only has 700 megahertz. Then over to the H zone is called the PC Win DVRS, which is the digital radio. It's essentially a digital repeater that Pima County has installed for use at certain incidents where they want to repeat radio traffic on a specific call. These probably will not be used for the most part, and we may be getting a lot more use out of the simplex portion of these PC Win frequencies. And you can refer to the book on the in the H zone to this. You can see that the first 4 channels are digital trunk radio groups, and the remainder of them are simplex or direct frequencies on the 800 megahertz. Again, I don't see us using the DVRSs too terribly much, but these simplex channels we potentially will, most likely on some major incidents if we ever interface with agencies who are only on the PC Win radio network. Then we move to the I zone, which is a PC Win fill-in or remote locations. These are predominantly used by the Pima County Sheriff's Department for those areas that are quite remote and mountainous, particularly in the southern and western portions of Pima County. Obviously, we will not be using these too terribly often, but they're there in our radios in the event that we find ourselves in some of these areas. And as you can look on the reference, Ajo Mountain, Sierra Colorado, the Arivaca area, Mildred Peak, Kit Peak, a lot of these areas are to the south and west of us. And those are just essentially talk groups that are repeaters that are located in these locations so they can talk back into the network. They're not part of the what's called the simulcast in Tucson. Go to the J zone. This is a deck that is not utilized for two-way radio communications. It's merely a technical bank, if you will, zone for over-the-air programming if we ever wish to program the radios over the air, or a lost radio. It's just again, it's a technical faux pas, if you will, and something we don't need to be concerned about because we will not be talking on the J zone. We now move to the K, and now we see yellow, which indicates VHF, so now we're back on VHF. And here is where the VHF airs resides. So again, as indicated in 800 megahertz airs, we have V airs, what you hear on V airs 1 through 5 on the repeaters, you'll also hear on 800 megahertz. That's a tri-band repeater system. We move into search and rescue, Pima County Sarah, the alternate frequency, and then also their primary, Sarah, and that's in K6 and K7. NOAA Weather Radio used to be on C16, now resides on K8. That's a great channel to listen for weather occurring in the Tucson area, and it's also another great channel to verify your radio is actually working, because it's always broadcast, and as indicated here in the mode, it's a receive only. Then we go into the VHF simplex frequencies of airs, and then we also have tactical repeaters, VTAC 33, VTAC 36. Of course, Golden Ranch has a VTAC 36 deployable repeater, and that's where it now resides, is in K16. If we move over to the L zone, is now the State Forester and also NIFOG. And again, I'll describe NIFOG in a moment. This is where we're going to find the State Forester frequencies, Arizona State Fire. We have now included 2 new tactical channels that they have since deployed since our last program, TAC 4 and TAC 5. Those are simplex channels. And then we have the 4 statewide repeaters that are situated throughout the state. And then we also have the mutual aid frequencies, the NIFOG frequencies for VHF and Fire. VFire 21, 22, and 23 also reside here. A couple more VTAC repeaters, 37 and 38. And then the last 2 channels are also new additions to our fleet map, L15 and L16, Arizona Flight Follow. And I'll get into more detail later when we meet one-on-one, the exact usages of it. But the most important one is L16 or Arizona 16, which is called the Guard Channel. The Guard Channel will be used for those events where an aircraft, a firefighting aircraft is in the vicinity, and they will be monitoring this frequency at all times. And it's restricted to air-to-air emergency contact and coordination, ground-to-air emergency contact, initial call or recall, or redirection of aircraft, and no other contact frequency is available. So this would be an option, an optional channel to use in the event of an emergency. You have an aircraft that's overhead, and you know that you could possibly contact him for critical communications. This would be the channel that it would take place on. Again, when we get together, I'll be describing in greater detail some of the nuances and particulars of this particular channel. And lastly, the M zone. This is Pinell County agencies. Fortunate for us, all of Pinell County currently is on VHF, as indicated by the yellow, and we still maintain the 2 Oracle frequencies in M1 and M2. M2, which is the Southwest Ambulance F6, that's the repeater, that's the primary dispatch and response channel that the Oracle Fire Department uses. And then we just go on down the list here, San Manuel, through Mammoth, Florence, Casa Grande, Regional. Any fire agency that's in the Pinell County area resides on the M deck. Okay, the most important part of this video probably resides right here, and that is the maneuvering through the frequency guide that we just went over, the fleet map guide, and the radios themselves. As we know, this is a dual band radio. This radio takes place of the 2 radios we used to carry, VHF and PC Win. However, our mobile radios are still single band. But the fleet map guide will always steer you through the correct channel assignment. So in this case, the single band PC Win radio. You may not see it in this video, but in the A zone, this particular channel is unprogrammed. It's unprogrammed because it would be a yellow channel or a VHF channel. But as I turn the dial, I will finally hit A14,
TAC 1,
which is right here, which is green, and then A15.
A15 car to car,
But that would be the only channels I'd have in the A zone. If I go over to a VHF radio, the Motorola for instance, I can maneuver A1 through 13, as indicated on the yellow card. Once I get to A13, A14 is a PC Win frequency, so I will not have it on this radio. It'll jump to 16, as per the guide. The same is true once I go to the B zone. Go to the B zone on this radio. The B zone does not have a digital talk group on this channel 1, which indicates by unprogrammed, but as I start to turn the dial, it starts to rotate through.
calling, UMC main,
Same with this radio. It does not have a B zone because the B zone is predominantly green for the exception of 3 frequencies. So if I bump over to the zone, go to B, have B11, B1, B16. B11, B1, 16. Now, those are the only 3 VHF frequencies that reside on this radio, like the guide would say. B1, 11, and 16. Same with this radio. It's a single band radio. These radios will not have the C zone because the C is the commons for PC Win. You will not have D or E, but the next zone that they would go to would be the K zone. And again, you can refer to the manual, to the fleet guide, and it will guide you through the various frequencies. The only exception, of course, would be the dual band handheld radio, because the dual band handheld radio has both 800 megahertz PC Win incorporated into it and also VHF. So regardless, this radio has all the zones, A all the way through the K zone. We included a Z zone in here. That's VHF new. That will come later when we do some reprogramming on the VHF side of the radios. But at this time, the Z zone is not activated. So again, this radio here will not have the L or M zone because they are VHF.
8 Arizona TAC 5D car 2 car.
And these radios will not have the F zone, or mutual aid 800 megahertz, because these are not 800 megahertz radios. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You'll get used to it. It may seem a little awkward at first, but due to the fact that we predominantly reside 99% of the time in the A zone, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Regardless, vehicles will still remain on the A zone for any F1, F2, F3, F4 through 7 or 8 assignment. The handheld radio can be changed for F2 and F3 only in the B zone. And again, I've pre-programmed these radios to accept quick recall to F2 by simply pressing 2 or pressing 3. As indicated in the fleet map, B3 is the same as A3, and what you hear on A2 would also be heard on B2. Okay, and lastly, we'll go over charging. It hasn't changed either, but these new radios will require these adapter sleeves to be placed in all the gang chargers now at all the fire stations. And when I come around to distribute the radios, I'll also be including the adapters for the batteries to slip into the gang chargers. The only kind of anomaly with these new APX 7000 radios is you can only charge 5 of them at one time with the belt clips on. You just can't quite get the middle radio in there because the belt clips kind of get in the way. So instead of having to remove this belt clip, which can be a somewhat of a task, it'd just be much easier to remove a battery instead and just charge the individual battery without the radio to get into that extra slot. Because again, it just will not happen with 4 radios in a row. So as you can see, you can get 3 in there, but the 4th one won't quite fit. And that's basically it. Nothing has, again, changed on these other than the adapter sleeves. And all the stations will now have these new Empress gang chargers so they can charge batteries for these new 7000 series radios. In closing, I want to reiterate that F2 and F3 are tied to both A and B zone in the handheld radios. And this only applies to the handhelds, as the vehicle radios are single band VHF only. And F2 and F3 assignments will remain in the A zone in the vehicles. So if the assignment is an F2, F3, F4, F6, F7, that remains an A zone in the vehicles and can be and also A zone in the handheld radios for those tactical channels such as 4, 5, 6, and 7 will remain in A. I know this is a lot of material. Again, I'll be coming around to the stations to answer questions, go over scenarios, when to use channels such as AIRS and the NIFOG, which is the National Interoperable Field Operations Guide that are used in mutual aid type situations. Thanks again, and be safe.